Starting in 1972, MASH ran for 11 seasons before ending with a final episode that was one of the most watched TV shows of all time. And while I did watch MASH when it was on CBS's evening shows, it was during reruns around here in Salt Lake City that I really started to love the show, which would play 2 times a day on KSL television, once in the evening and then later on at night, in fact at 10 o'clock p.m. KSL would show this very important message on the screen, parents. A voice would say, "It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?" Of course, my parents always did. We weren't allowed to stay out late in our house. And then the KSL evening news would start with Norris Welty and James Worthy. These guys were famous in the 70s and 80s in Utah. And when they finished the news, they would say, "Stay tuned for MASH." And then, behind them, MASH would start and slowly take over the whole screen, at least. That's how I remember it happening back then. CBS didn't have a good late-night talk show to compete with Carson, so KSL, which was our local CBS station, used MASH to compete with the most popular late-night comedy show, and compete it did, at least. In our house, as we got older and became teenagers, bedtimes were gone, but unless it was a weekend, my parents had a pretty strict rule that MASH was pretty much the last thing that any of us were allowed to watch on TV before going to our bedrooms. And because of that rule, well, pretty much everyone in our house grew to love this show. As I think back, that cast really was amazing. This show truly was Alan Alda's shining moment. But everyone, and I do mean everyone, who made up the show's main cast of characters had reason to be proud, especially Gary Burghoff, who played Walter Eugene Radar O'Reilly. For the first 7 seasons of the show, he was also the only member of the TV cast to appear in the 1970 Robert Altman movie that the TV show is based on. Radar was the company clerk and, in many ways, the true heart and soul of the show. While many of the other characters used sarcasm and meanness as a way of dealing with the emotional pain that they were feeling, Radar still looked at things with a sense of innocence. Burghoff played Radar in a way that he was allowed to be innocent without being stupid. Radar simply wanted to see the good in things. He'd been raised that way. So, with all that said, it was really sad for us MASH fans to have Gary leave the show after the 7th season, and when he did return during the 8th season to film a special 2-part goodbye episode, fans couldn't help but wonder out loud, would Gary pull a Don Knotts and return to MASH for an episode or 2 each year, the same way that Knotts did on the Andy Griffith Show? But that was not going to happen, because you see, Gary had made the very hard decision to walk away from the daily demands of an industry where you can never give enough. Why? Well, the answer is pretty simple, really. You see, while Burghoff was away from home filming MASH, a California brush fire almost killed his wife and daughter. Thankfully, God stepped in, and at the last minute, firefighters were able to stop the fire, but not before it made its way onto Burghoff's ranch property. In fact, according to the article that I read in TV Week magazine, the fire stopped just short of the back door. Can you imagine that, being separated from the people that you love the most, unable to protect them and comfort them? I can only imagine that those were the feelings racing through Gary's mind while he was on the MASH set. And apart from his family, here's what he said: "It made me realize that anything could happen to them at any time, and I think we should be together as much as possible." Because of that, Gary made the decision to leave MASH. It wasn't easy, but sometimes making the right decision can be a hard thing to do from time to time. When Burghoff felt that he was able to take a job without hurting family life, he would still show up on the small screen. When, after Masech started Radar, O'Reilly made a couple of appearances on that show, and around the same time he even filmed a pilot for a possible spin-off called Walter, where Radar becomes a member of the St. Louis Police Department over the course of the 80s and early 90s. Burghoff made a few appearances, but really did seem to be true to his word. Along with family time, he continued to grow hobbies such as painting and music. As a serious fisherman, He holds the patents for a couple of inventions related to that sport, and Gary is also a serious stamp collector from 1995 to 2010. He focused on family and his own general well-being, and, as such, stayed away from the entertainment industry completely. It wasn't that he held any sort of hate for show business, but rather he just decided to gracefully retire on his own terms instead of anyone else's. That said, Burghoff did come out of retirement just briefly in 2010 to star in the faith-based film titled Daniel's Lot. That movie's main character is forced to think again about his priorities, what is really important to him, after a chance meeting with a local pastor played by, yep, you guessed it, Gary Burghoff. Is it any wonder that this movie was appealing to him? While the circumstances in the film may have been different, Gary had done exactly the same thing decades ago when he decided to leave MASH behind. And just in case you're wondering, that's not to say that everything has gone perfectly for Gary. Shortly after quitting MASH, his first marriage did end. Clearly, he was right to want to focus on family. While that brush fire may have been an immediate wake-up call for him, I've got to believe that he felt that perhaps if he were able to be home more, he and his wife could work things out. Burghoff would marry again in 1985, but that marriage would end as well 20 years later. Gary has 3 children from those 2 relationships, and being that he really is a true family man, I've got to believe that those 3 kids, now adults, well, they mean everything to him. So that's it. Radar really was a fun character in MASH, well, with or without Radar O'Reilly. It was a heck of a great show, although it was definitely better with him. Now, it's your turn. Please share your memories in the comments section, and while you're at it, I'd love a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and I would be absolutely honored if you would consider subscribing to my channel. I talk about music, movies, and television, mostly from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. You know the good stuff, but most importantly, and as always, thank you so much for watching.